Good afternoon. My name is Victor Simmons Jr. I am the library administrator here at the Auburn Avenue Research Library. I want to first thank all of you for being here today as we close out our Collecting, Researching, and Writing While Black conference. As we come to the closing of the conference, I am filled with immense pride and gratitude. Over the past 3 days, we have witnessed the extraordinary coming together of minds, hearts, and spirits, all dedicated to celebrating and preserving Black history and culture. First and foremost, I wanted to extend my deepest thanks to our incredible staff. Their hard work, dedication, and passion have been the backbone of this event. From the preparation and flawless execution, they have made this conference an outstanding success. Let's give them all a well-deserved round of applause. I also want to express my heartfelt appreciation to all of our panelists. Their insight, expertise, and willingness to share their knowledge have been truly inspiring. Each session was a testament to the power of storytelling and the importance of documenting our rich cultural heritage. Their contributions have made this conference not just informative, but transformative. To our community, thank you for your unwavering support. Your presence and enthusiasm have been the driving force behind this event. It is your commitment to learning, sharing, and growing that ensures the legacy of our history that remains vibrant and relevant. Together, we are preserving our past and shaping our future. I am excited to announce that due to the overwhelming success and positive feedback, we plan to make Collecting, Researching, and Writing While Black Conference an annual signature event. We look forward to continuing this journey with you, bringing even more voices and stories to the forefront. Now, it is my honor to introduce our closing keynote speaker for the Annie L. McPheeters Lecture Series, Derek Bozeman. He is a native Atlantan, former Atlanta City Councilman, and community organizer. He is the president and CEO of Global Leadership Solutions Incorporated, specializing in strategic planning and group facilitation. Derek holds a bachelor's degree in political science from Morris Brown College, where he began his political career as Student Government Association president. As the host of the daily talk show Too Much Truth with Derek Bozeman, and an active member to various community and educational organizations, Derek has been a steadfast advocate for our community. He is also a proud member of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and the Prince Hall affiliated Masons. Please join me in welcoming Derek Bozeman to the stage.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. Y'all can do better than that. Good afternoon. All right. Let me thank Victor and the library for the honor of coming and kind of sharing with you all. And I love that we're an intimate crowd. How many of you all are from Atlanta? How many from Atlanta? Native Atlantans? Raise your hand high. All right, now let me just ask the qualifying question. How many of y'all are born at Grady Hospital? Raise your hand, because that's the only way you can really claim native status. I want y'all to stand up, and I want everybody to applaud these real ATLians, okay? Hugh Spalding is the Grady. Hugh Spalding. Now, where are some of y'all who raised your hand? What were you born at? McLendon, the you and Skip Mason McLendon Hospital. Okay, that was the African American hospital that delivered a lot of our babies. Where are you, the rest of you all from? Y'all from different places? You all who are not from Atlanta. Holy Family. I want you to remind me of Holy Family, because I got a Holy Family story in just a few minutes, okay? Anybody else? Who's from out of town, or you're not born and raised here? Where are you from? Trinidad and Tobago. You know how to make roti? Been here since 72, but do you still cook roti and know how to make roti from scratch?
I know how to make curry chicken, and I'll buy the roti.
Oh, he's going to buy the roti. Okay. All right. I have to tell you about the job I had out of high school when the cook, I was at a Jamaican restaurant, the cook had to leave kind of abruptly, and I had to learn how to make roti and all of the food. Yes, where you all from up front? Yeah, down here. If y'all don't know, I'm very unorthodox. This is not, if you will come into a lecture that's going to be scholarly and all that, it's going to be scholarly, but I'm here to make y'all work for the next 45 minutes or so. Yes.
Raised in Birmingham, Alabama, born in Nashville, Tennessee.
Wow. You know what struggle looks like, I bet, right? All right. All right.
St. Joseph, Missouri, raised, this was 6 states though.
Missouri, where else? Give us some of the others you've lived in. Kansas, California. All right, you've been kind of all around the place. Good stuff. Somebody in the back was yelling, yes.
Everglades, Florida, Lake Okeechobee, Florida.
All right,
Everglades.
good. Well, welcome.
I'm a swamp woman.
Good, good. I know you're glad to be in Atlanta. We got storm brewing down there now, right? Let me just start this kind of conversation off saying that I'm a native Atlanta, born and raised on the south side of the city. And I have had the good fortune, if you have lived in Atlanta and you have had any nexus with civil rights, then you've lived in a place where some of the most iconic names have lived. They all came back here. You know, whether it was C.T. Vivian, the man who refused to stay down on the ground when he was hit in the mouth by Sheriff Clark, just trying to register people to vote, not trying to vote, but register people to vote. Julian Bond, who we'll talk about in a few minutes, one of the brightest minds that I've ever seen at work. Joseph Lowry, Andy Young, our ambassador and mayor and congressman, who's very much active in this community still. They all came and settled here. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm going to walk you through a leadership journal, if you will, and then go behind the scenes. But what I really desire more than anything for you to do is to ask questions, right? And I am of the age, because I got started at this really young, where I've been an eyewitness to a lot of history. And at 58, be 59 in June, I sit in rooms that I didn't understand where I was until after I had gotten up out of the room. And I'm going to walk you through a little bit of what that's been like. Given that, who's my clicker? And so let's start with Arthur Langford Jr. I always start with Arthur Langford because at the age of 17, I had the good fortune to meet Arthur Langford. Arthur Langford was the youngest man, even to date, to ever be elected to the Atlanta City Council at age 23. He was a graduate of Morris Brown College. And so he was also associate pastor at West 100th Street Baptist Church. That's where I met him. So he has an organization called the United Youth Adult Conference. Arthur was so profoundly moved by the life of Dr. King and by his assassination that in 1972 he creates this organization called United Youth/Adult Conference. And when you look at it, it is patterned after another organization called the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, right? But Arthur is an important figure to me personally because at 17 I meet him and it changes the trajectory of my life. Arthur Langford is holding a teen leadership summit at West Hunter because he was always concerned about young people. A young man himself, he only lived to be 44. But he packed so much in that 44 years that you would, if you'd known Arthur Langford. Anybody knew Arthur? Raise your hand. Anybody knew him? Okay. If you knew him, then you thought this guy was about in his 70s. But at 23, I told you, elected to Atlanta City Council. But what made him so important to me is I got a chance to meet him. At that time, 17, I had transferred from the school in the hood, Price High School, went to North Fulton International Baccalaureate Program, a multicultural, kind of discipline school. The story how I got there is too long to repeat. But I was tracked into a special education class with a 3.5 grade point average, and I told them folks at Price, I'm out of here. Because if you can't understand that I'm trying to say street instead of screet, now I'm having a list because I got my Invisaligns in. I should have took them out. But that's why I'm having a list today. It's not because my enunciation, the pronunciation ain't on point. But Arthur goes through this Teen Leadership Institute, and it comes to an end. And I see him trying to put all of his wares together and get in his car. And I asked him, because I rode the bus to get there, I asked him, could I help you load your car? And he said, sure. And then after I get all his flip charts and the stuff he brought with him in the car, he says, do you need a ride? And I said, what? Sure. He said, where do you live? I said, I live in Betmar. He said, the village? I said, yes. He said, I was born and raised in Joyland, which is the next community over. If you know Atlanta, then you know these communities are connected. And I said, you born and raised in Joyland? He said, yeah, my mom still lives there. And so that's how I become to know him. And we become fast friends. I was enamored by him. If you see this young brother with his haircut and his wide mustache, that's who I met, right? This great-looking guy, very well-spoken, very articulate, and about his business. And Arthur was always dressed like that. He was always sharp, always sharp. And so after I meet him, I asked him, what did he do? And he told me he was had been a member of the city council and was transitioning into the state senate. And so in my 17-year-old imagination, I didn't know what a city councilman was, what they did. But this is the power of mentorship, right? So I eventually go to work for Arthur at his Senate office and become like a confidant of him. In the process of meeting him, I meet his brother, Michael Langford, who becomes the best friend that I have really in the world. And he was a confidant of his brother. And a little bit about Arthur and Holy Family. When I really want to know about an individual, I do my research and I start being probative. And so I was just enamored by him. And the first lesson nugget coming out of this lecture is always have you somebody that you can look up to. I don't care what age it is. If you have a field of endeavor, you want to get something done, always have somebody you look up to. And so Arthur allowed me to work for him, and I was just glad to carry his bag. But I carried that bag into some of the most important meetings. He was a close associate of Zell Miller. The governor loved Arthur at the time. He served under Zell Miller and traveled the world with him. And so I get to go to all of these meetings, and I'm just a young brother who carried the bag. But I met James Carville, who would go subsequently run the campaign of the governor, and then he would run the campaign for president of Bill Clinton, right? And so the Raging Cajun meet him and get involved in politics in a very serious way, either running or assisting with his brother running some of the most important campaigns, including lieutenant governor, governor's races here in Georgia. But Arthur is a serious advocate. He becomes influenced by all of the folks around civil rights, including Hosea Williams, becomes a major influencer of his. But he is, as a young person, one of those who just had a real sense of social justice, and he becomes a pastor, becomes a preacher. Pastor Rush Memorial Church, ends up at West Hunter. At West Hunter at the time, Ralph David Abernathy was the senior pastor. So he pastored under the man whom Dr. King says the best friend he has in the world. So because Arthur was never on time, most of the time when I go meet with him at his office at West Hunter, I end up sitting with whom? Ralph David Abernathy. So many of the first-hand accounts for the stuff that you can historically document, Ralph was a great storyteller. And so Dr. Abernathy. And so I get to hear all of these stories about Dr. King, and then I will go back and validate and research it. But Holy Family Hospital become a watershed moment for Arthur Langford, and he is why I start my leadership journey and conversations, because he meant just that much to me. But Arthur is down there picketing Holy Family Hospital on what is now Fairburn Road, because they would not allow black people and black nurses to practice medicine there. Black doctors could not practice there. Black And this is in 1972. Okay, 1972. That's how important and profound he is. He, Hosea Williams, Joseph Boone, several set up a tent out front, and that became a tactic of Arthur Langford's. And I helped set up many of them tents later and with his brother. But he's sitting out there and he's picketing and he's saying, look, we cannot live in a city like Atlanta with the emerging black class that's coming forth and not have an opportunity to go to hospital in our neighborhood, really, because the demographics are changing even in 72. The administrator of Holy Family comes out and shoots through the tent, shoots Arthur Langford in the chest. The bullet goes through Arthur Langford's chest and hit Willie Ricks, Mukasa, who is still around here, in the side. They are rushed to Thornton's, Gus Thornton Funeral Home, where a young man was working there named Willie Watkins, who was an understudy at the funeral home. They get them to there. Willie puts them in a funeral car with a siren on top, drives them to Grady Hospital, saves their lives. So Arthur Langford, and that was, of course, before I met him. And so when I meet him and get to know him, I hear that story and know that story. And I had seen, because I was so close to him, I'd seen when he even got dressed. The bullet went in his chest. That was a cross where they had to take the bullet out and incision the cross on his chest that bore where he had been shot. So Arthur Langford become very profound. He go on and served in the state senate, and he dies 1994, 44 years old of renal failure. So I'm literally there as his ascension and see all the good works he do in the community, and was there even at his death. And so he becomes such a profound player. Before his death, and we'll talk about it later in events, Arthur organizes the searches for the missing and murdered children of Atlanta. I want you to put a pin there, because he rises to national recognition and national acclaim because he had the audacity to defy even the leadership at that time and go out and search for these missing and murdered children. Remember, he founded the United Youth Adult Conference. His heart was always with the young people, and so he becomes a stopping point for us. Let's move on from Arthur Langford. If you are sitting on Auburn Avenue, this was considered one of the richest streets in America, richest black streets in America. It was everything that Tulsa, Oklahoma, and Wall Street was, Black Wall Street was in Tulsa. Whatever you needed could be found where Peachtree meets Auburn, all the way back past the King Center. Your black doctors were here, your black physician, your black bank was here. Everything economically that was an economic-made Atlanta, an economic powerhouse, was here. The preachers were here. The Big Five was here. Daddy King, William Holmes Border. Why is William Holmes Border such, I put him up there above a lot of the others in this corridor, because William Holmes Border was not only a preacher, he was a financial whiz. Wheat Street Baptist Church, where he was the pastor, amassed a great fortune. They were at about $16 million in the 50s of real estate that they controlled. They owned the shopping center, they owned Wheat Street Towers, they had the historic church that sits there, and they own much of the lower part of Auburn Avenue in his leadership. They even opened up, now this is prior to all of this great technology and everything else. They have their own bank. They have their credit union, all right? And it ran really until the 80s and the early 90s. But William Holmes Border became this larger-than-life preacher on the block. And probably, when you look at him, becomes one of the, the first time you see the mixing of the financial piece with church, because he understood if you're going to have something, you need to own it. And I don't have a lot of time to go through the Atlanta way. I'm going to talk a little bit about that because you hear a lot about that. But William Home Borders, A.D. Walden, you talk about Daddy King. They are profound. We can go to Daddy King, the next slide. Daddy King, another giant of a man, not because he is ML's father, but because he was one of the great interpreters for the black struggle back to the white community. And so I'm sure if you were here any part of the week or you heard Skip Mason's, he probably talked about the Atlanta way. How many of y'all heard the Atlanta way? How many of y'all know what that is? We always had a way. Atlanta developed a way, and its leadership, black and white, decided that it did not want to necessarily be Birmingham. It did not want to be this place where explosion of protests occurred on the street, right? And so the white community came to the leadership at the time, principally Daddy King, A.D. Walden, William Home Borders, and a couple others to say, what do we do to avoid that, right? What did they do to avoid that? And so what does Daddy King do? Daddy King cuts a deal and says to the business white elite here, Mills Lane, who's president of CNS Bank, it's a major bank in the city, and to the banking institution and the financial folks who still to this day run Atlanta. I know we have a black mayor, but the financial institution and machinations are not necessarily run out of City Hall. If you believe that, you don't understand how it works, right? And so Daddy King said, we can hold our people back, but you talk to us, talk to the five, we will go talk to the leadership. The leadership would then tell black people, but you got to do something for black people. And so, and as a result of that, we will not have all of the hoses turned on folks. We will not have the dogs. You don't see that in Atlanta. And the reason why is because they cut those kinds of deals with the business community and others. Atlanta has always been concerned about business, even to this very hour. The perception of division, the perception of racial animus and hatred, they wanted to avoid that at all costs. And so Daddy King says there will be no major marches led by my son in Atlanta. So if you go search the history books, you do not see Dr. King leading any major marches or protests in Atlanta. You will see SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. You'll see that wing say, we're not bound by that. We're going to go sit in at Woolworth, and you'll see Lonnie King and a lot of those who did that. But the deal was cut. Atlanta was looking in its future to know that all of those states that got settled with that racial animus like that made no real progress. It was slower for them to become these international cities. Atlanta was competing with Birmingham, with places like Charlotte and others, to be the gateway to the New South. But they know that they could not do that if on the news you turn on and you saw dogs and hoses and horses and people being beat. And so it became the Atlanta way of doing things. We come to the table with just a few handful of blacks. They go and cut the deal for the masses of people. And we come back, and the white government at that time, as well as the white business structure, follows what those 5 or 6 men said. And that's how Atlanta got through the 50s and 60s and early 70s. Next. Then you get Hosea Williams, heavily influenced by William Home Borders, because he saw what people didn't realize about Hosea. A lot of times we reduce Hosea to this wide-eyed guy who likes to drink and party and holler at alley pad and laugh and joke. But this young man here was one of the first black research scientists ever hired by the federal government. out of Savannah, Georgia. Smart guy, graduated from Morris Brown College. Phi Beta Sigma. But he was a research scientist and a chemist. Many people do not know this about Hosea. Hosea always knew how to make money. Hosea had Terry Enterprises, and it had, soon as Home Depot opened, 1979, 80, it had his products all over Home Depot. The man was not nobody's slouch, or he was not a slacker. Very smart guy, right? And so Hosea becomes a frontline stormtrooper. He becomes the captain of the ground crew and the one whose job was to fill up the jails. And nobody could do it quite like him, a master organizer. Influences Arthur Langford. Him and Arthur become very close. I sit in many meetings with the two of them. He becomes a confidant of Langford's, and influenced by William Home Borders, coming out of, so in fact, the story goes, he's coming out of Wheat Street, and a man on Auburn Avenue told him he was hungry and he wanted something to eat. He buys a fish sandwich for the man. The man is so hungry, he eats through the paper, right? And at that point, 50 some odd years ago, Jose said, look, I'm going to start a program because even a city like progressive Atlanta, we have hungry people and nobody is seeing after them. He becomes totally sold out to be the voice of the voiceless. But I remember having a conversation with Jose. He said, and I'm in my 20s now, maybe 22, 23 years old. I meet him shortly after I meet Langford. He told me, Derek, I'm going to tell you the best way to help the poor is what? Not be one of them. He said the best way to help the poor not to be one of them. And I didn't understand what that meant, right? Because I saw this man literally give everything he had to all the people all the time. But I went back to the conversation why he created Hosea Feed the Hungry. The man ate through the wrapper. But guess what? If Hosea didn't have $5 to go in there and buy the sandwich, that man was gone on about his business. So the best way to help the poor is not be one of them became a learning point for me. I would go and sit at his office for hours because he loved to talk. If you ever spent any time around and you had any time, he would talk to you for hours. And because I was such a sponge, he had an office in Kirkwood. I would go sit at his, again, the chemical company, right? Hosea never made no big issue out of it, but he always had a company that made a lot of money. Okay, well, you know, a lot of money. Hosea was that guy. But as a political figure, it runs for state house, runs for the DeKalb County Commission, even won one time election from jail. I mean, that's just how bad this dude was. How many of y'all knew Hosea Williams, ever met him and you know him, spent any time with him? Got in time to spent with him, then you know the people love him and he loved the people. Gave him everything he had. I was on city council when he died and was honored to name the street. Me, Michael, Julian Bond, a couple of us put the legislation in that renamed the street in his honor. Let's go to the next person. Julian Bond. Again, I'm just sharing with you some of the figures who live here. Julian Bond, Morehouse man, just a exceptionally bright individual. Julian Bond was a heady person, and if you look in the Bond family, it is replete with academicians. You know, the granddaddy, president of Lincoln University, you know, they have just up and down the rung and ladder, nothing but heavyweights in academia. And that was not missed on Julian Bond. Julian Bond gets elected to the House of Representatives in Georgia in 1965, I believe, and to go to be seated, and the Georgia legislature refused to seat him. Julian had come out with Dr. King against the Vietnam War. And the war is raging. And the predominantly white legislature said, we are not going to seat this anti-American guy in the Georgia legislature. Junior has to sue all the way up to the Supreme Court, in order to be seated in the Georgia legislature. Bright mind, and we'll come back to him in just a few minutes to talk a little bit about his ascension in politics and how he left Atlanta in another epoch in time. But one of the brightest minds I ever met, when Arthur got to the legislature, Julian was already there. A lot of people call Julian arrogant. Julian had a phone message that said, "Do not leave a message on this phone. It does not like taking messages. And if I didn't answer, don't call back." Something similar to that. But Julian was pulled between just a lot of different interests. As I said, was nominated to be the vice president in 1964, I believe it was, 65, one of the elections, one of the national conventions, and was too young for them to enter his name. He was 32, 33 years old, too young to have his name entered into it. And you talk to his son, Michael Julian Bond, who I have the pleasure of serving with on city council. Mike will tell you one of his fondest memories is that Julian Bond was so smart and so well-liked that he hosted Saturday Night Live, was on the front of Playboy magazine, but just one of the brightest and sharpest minds that I've ever met, a serious intellectual. But he did not suffer fools gladly either. He was sharp-witted and sharp-tongued, very short and curt with you. But let's go to who's next. Julian Bond, 1966. You'll see, we'll talk in a few minutes about women in politics, Gracetown Hamilton. But the emergence of this young man here, Maynard Holbrook Jackson. The audacity to run in the late 60s, 68, 69, against Herman Talmadge, who was as legendary of a figure in politics, larger than life in Georgia. The senior senator, United States senator, and a 29, 30-year-old Maynard Holbrook Jackson said, "I'm going to run against them." And Maynard knew he had no chance of winning that election, right? But he also did not know he would get about 30% of the vote. This is a statewide election. And so this is Maynard's first foray into politics. So he runs against Talmadge, and Talmadge, clearly the United States Senator Talmadge was perturbed by that, right? And they were intended to run Maynard right on out of town. But he did so much better than anybody thought with almost very little kind of campaign apparatus. He knew that I think the Maynard Jackson I knew always was a visionary looking, casting into the future. He knew that 30% easily translated into a victory inside Atlanta. Because that is Atlanta, and then that's what? The rest of Georgia, right? Atlanta is not, how many of y'all do know Atlanta is not Georgia? You drive 20 minutes up anyway, you start seeing rebel flag and lawn jockeys and, all kind of stuff. If you go to Carrollton right now, going to downtown Carrollton, they got more Confederate flags per every few yards than you can believe, and that's only about 45-minute drive from here, right? But Maynard emerges as a major player because he then recalibrates and says, you know what, I'm going to run for mayor against Sam Massell, a Jewish guy at the time. He said, I'm going to run for mayor. And of course, 1973, 74, he wins and takes office. And it signals a new political day in the South. His win is not just an Atlanta win. It becomes really what casts Atlanta. You remember I talked about Atlanta way of doing things. It really casts Atlanta as the new front door and a new welcome mat to really what will become an international city. And Maynard had a lot to do with that. When I come to City Hall, to City Council, Maynard is just leaving his third term. And so Maynard runs for office. He serves 2 terms as mayor. He puts in place an affirmative action program. He begins to understand economics. He always was a numbers man, a bond attorney who put together complex bond deals. I would tell y'all about one of those before I get out. Somebody remember to ask me about the one that they tried to deny him, but it didn't happen because some of us was there to make sure it didn't happen. He becomes the godfather of politics, of black politics, not just in the South. All right, and he ushers in an era of black economics, probably more responsible for more black millionaires in this city than any other individual. And I will tell you, there are some. When it opened up the airport to airports, construction and concessions, it instantly made millionaires. I will tell you, if you done ate a chicken, how many of y'all done flew through Hartsfield, Jackson? Every business out there is a multi-million-dollar corporation. 100 million people come through that airport. So if you're selling chicken, you done sold out completely. You're selling hot dog, hamburger, newspaper, bubble gum, you're a multi-millionaire. When you walk through that airport, you're talking about multi-millionaires, all of them. Not a single one of them is broke, okay? And that is because his insistence on a black participation in city contracts, and it cost him dearly. When Maynard Jackson's term of office was over, he had to leave Atlanta and go to Chicago to get a job because they punished him for making sure that black people had an opportunity to participate in the economics of the city. And at a later time, I will talk about why that's so important, because some of them same people he made multimillionaires did not turn around to help this brother. Okay? All right? When he left, he had to leave in order to feed his family and go create an opportunity for himself. But that was Maynard Holbrook Jackson. Grace Towns Hamilton becomes the first woman elected to the Georgia legislature, and she's elected in 1966, I believe. Urban leaguer, smart, elected to the in 66. She stays in office until 1984, but it signaled a new day in women, for women in politics, right? She is the forerunner. We say that Grace Towns Hamilton walked so that Kamala Harris could run. Because before then, the movement was oftentimes misogynistic in its tone and tenor, just the way it was. And women was oftentimes thought to hold the family together. But Hamilton said, no, I'm running. And she emerged as a woman. Same time as Julian Bond, about the same time. Leroy Johnson precedes them, and Leroy didn't have time because I ain't going to be here for 2 or 3 hours lecturing. But Leroy Johnson becomes an epic figure, becomes first black senator. And he is the one who gets Muhammad Ali back into boxing. If y'all saw how many of y'all watched that thing last night? Okay, I'm praying for y'all. Extend your hand towards the front. I'm praying that you get your money back from Netflix. But no, the reemergence of Muhammad Ali happens because Senator Leroy Johnson has to cut a deal to get him that. But Grace Towns Hamilton comes. She serves until 1984. And she is knocked off by another woman. She's beat by the legendary Abel Mabel Thomas. 1984, Abel runs against her. Young Abel Mabel Thomas, 28 years old maybe, somewhere thereabout, runs and beats the grande dame of politics. A lot of people mad at Mabel because they said you should just let her go on and stay. But Mabel said, no, it's my turn, it's my opportunity, and if I don't run now, it'll be my fault that I didn't. And she runs and wins against Grace Towns Hamilton. Next. Carolyn Long Banks becomes the first black woman elected to the Atlanta City Council. Carolyn Long, smart, again, just a hard worker. She emerges in like 1980, I believe, somewhere thereabout, but served a wonderful, but she was a serious politician now. Carolyn was the consummate deal cutter. She knew politics back and front. You couldn't get around her. right? And so Carolyn Long Banks emerges as the person on the city council that could make things happen. And she kind of becomes this understated legend, right? A lot of these people don't get the kind of accolades that she deserves. Carolyn made a transition a couple of years ago. It's not been that long, but she was somebody to be a force to be reckoned with in politics and city politics. I remember saying that she smoked. I don't know if she was still smoking, but Carolyn would be smoking and wheeling and dealing, but you couldn't get around Carolyn Long Banks. All right, next. You hear about all of these people that we've talked about, but the power in Atlanta always rested in communities. I don't care how you cut it. And Atlanta had a huge public housing and a poverty issue, just like Atlanta has a huge poverty issue as well here. It is the largest income inequality that exists in Atlanta, Georgia, is larger than any other place in the country. And some of the people who were organizing, people at the grassroots, were folks like Dorothy Bolden. Anybody knew Dorothy Bolden? Well, if you were around City Hall in the 70s and 80s and a little bit into the 90s, you couldn't miss her. When she came in, she did not stop by the mayor's secretary desk. She walked right on in the back. Dorothy was short. She was beautiful, beautiful brown skin, always had her hair waved, and when she walked in like the daughter of thunder. And she wonderfully understated, but could cuss like a sailor. Dorothy organized the domestic workers. I can tell you a little bit about this. When I transferred out of Price and went to North Fulton, that was 1982. I mean, as late as 1982. I would catch the 23. That before they built out the train station, go all the way to Buckhead. I'd have to catch the 23 bus. And it was me. I had to get up 5:30, 6 o'clock, get the bus, be out at my good white school by the time it opened 7:30. And so I would have to get on the bus, and I would wait down by 5 points, a little bit down the hill to catch the 23. And it would be all these maids with their, black dress, white, thing around the waist. And they would be going to Buckhead. But Dorothy organized them for greater working rights. So she organized domestic workers, and she was a serious organizer. And to the day she died, she was coming down the hall. Whoever was the mayor, she didn't care nothing about Maynard, Bill, none of them. She told them all off and what they needed to do for poor people. That could not be a Maynard Jackson if there's not somebody like a Dorothy Bolden, because you had to come through her, because they listened to her. And they listened to black women even then. So Dorothy Bolden, a serious worker. The mayor of Carver Homes, Louise Watley. I know a lot about Louise because my grandmother lived in Carver Homes, and I live right out the outskirts in Bedmar. But Louise Watley was the president of the Citywide Tenants Association. Atlanta had the largest per capita public housing in the country. We had more public housing than any other place in the country. And most of it was what? Single black women with their what? Children. But they were a political force because back then she ruled Carver Homes with an iron fist. Then they got smart. In all of these 30-some-odd public housing areas, Carver Homes, Jonesboro North, Jonesboro South, Bowen Homes, Harris Home, Egan Home, John Hope Homes, Kimberly Court, all of these concentrations of what? Black women just meant black votes, so you had to deal with them. You could not go around them. And so Louise Watley emerges as one of those leaders who lived in public housing. Louise was so powerful that mayors came to her. I mean, everybody had to come to her because she was the one who was over or organized all of the women who made up the housing projects kind of tenants. And Louise would find herself in a big tussle with Mayor Jackson at one point. I won't go through a whole lot of it. That was a police killing of Eddie Lee Callahan out there. And it was not a very good shooting, right? They killed him. I remember me, Mike Langford, and several of us who lived in that area protesting for about a week. They sent a young man to quell, because even then, it was long before Black Lives Matter, we were out there saying, hey, they killed this man unjustifiably. And Maynard dispatched his top officer, who happened to be Eldrin Bell, to be the new zone commander in Zone 3. So we see Eldrin ascend to become the police chief. But he had to come out there to quell that community, because that was like real uprising. But Louise was that voice. And after that, she came down City Hall kicking up dust. She was not playing around with mayor, nobody else. And she wanted changes in the police department, and she then wanted gradually. And the compromise was, send us somebody out here that we can work with. We don't know this white boy who out here trying to police our community. And so that's Louise Watley. Next, Eva Davis. Now, when a housing authority, my dear friend who said I want to talk about the housing authority, where's she at? I can't see her. Okay. Eva Davis emerges as one of those leaders who, when the Atlanta Housing Authority began to revamp how it did housing, one of the first places they went was East Lake Meadows. Another iteration of my life was working with the Atlanta Project as a young man, being a real critic of it. Jimmy Carter said he was going to end poverty by 2020. That was started back in the early 90s, and we said, okay. But the way y'all going about it by sending people out here to tell poor people what they need is not going to work. So when we got ready to transform public housing, the first place they wanted to go was East Lake Meadows. Well, East Lake Meadows, anybody from Atlanta? Who the real folk from Atlanta again? Now, what did they call East Lake Meadows? Little what? Little Vietnam. Little Vietnam. Because you knew somebody was going to end up dead out there just about every other night, right? And Eva was the tenant association president, but she was an organizer. She didn't want no parts of no rehabilitation of public housing. And I remember one night I was dispatched with Mike Langford to go talk to Eva. And Eva loved Mike Langford and was learning to love me. Mike didn't drink. He was, just a good brother. I have a propensity to enjoy a beverage every now and then. We go to Eva Davis' house by 10 months. This is before they both vote to go through this conversion of public housing in that area. And she was really the whip, if you will. And so we were but was dispatched by the mayor to go talk to her to see where she was. And we got there about 9, 10 o'clock. She said, come on in, big brother. She said, sit down, you want something to drink? I said, yeah, I'll take some drink. She said, a slit malt look a bull now. I said, you ain't got nothing a little bit less feeling than this? But we sat and talked, and eventually they voted to go through this new transformative housing program, which now became East Lake Meadows, where poor people still get to stay, middle-income people stay, and people who pay market rent. And, of course, they put the PGA golf course right next to it, right? But Eva Davis she wasn't playing. She was a spitfire, serious about her people kind of person. Those are people, if you don't know those, and there are plenty more. Matty Jackson is next, I believe. Matty Jackson, Summer Hill. Summer Hill gets ready to go through a metamorphosis because that's where the Olympic is going to be. And they were going to just come in and just overly gentrify Summer Hill. Matty Jackson said, no way. I've been living here. Matty Ansley Jackson, I've been living here all of my life. And hand me that, I'll answer it for you. Okay. And she's like, y'all ain't just finna come in here and just take over. And had to push back, even against the Olympics. They were ready to picket and get on the international stage. Boy, they started giving Summer Hill hotel, that hotel that sits there, it was owned by Summer Hill Link. She was on the board. She ends up carrying the torch in the Olympics, but she emerges as this kind of transformative figure, even in her older age, for the Summer Hill community. And because she resisted and didn't just give up like that. And so Maddie Jackson is one of those figures you got to know. Very close to Bill Campbell, very close to Maynard and Andy, but she had a role to play in the leadership flow of Atlanta up until her death just about maybe 6 or 7 years ago. A couple events that reshaped the county of Atlanta, then I'll be done and really want to get to y'all's questions. When you talk about events that had an impact on the city, hit again. Probably the most profound ones, 1979, 80, children started coming up missing off the city's streets. I was 13 at the time, and so I was at the age of those who were getting snatched. And how many of y'all was in Atlanta during that period? It was scary. It was scary. It was scary. In fact, this young man, where's he at? Here, I think. No, here. Charles Stevens went to elementary school with me. In Ferguson Elementary School. Snatched from what was then the Winn-Dixie over on Metropolitan Parkway, Stewart Avenue. And so I was literally having friends snatched off the street. It was a defining moment in the history of Atlanta. If you go back and read about it, you talk about it, there's a lot to be discovered about it. There's a book called The List by Chet Dillinger, who was a Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It's probably one of the seminal works I've seen on this. Arthur Langford, I told you I was coming back to him, organizes the searches for the missing and murdered children. They just start disappearing one by one by one. And it really redefined and shook to the core. Maynard Jackson is the mayor, and people thought that a lot of this had to do with undermining his political leadership, and it became a real point of issue for him, right? And an issue for the city. But you go back to the Atlanta way of doing things, they didn't want you to kind of understand what was going on with it. Wasn't a whole lot being said, but some of those mothers of the missing and murdered children, they emerged as real advocates for their children. They didn't care nothing about the mayor, the leadership, or none of that. But they're saying our children are missing and Atlanta's not responding. And so it took Atlanta a long time. And to be honest with you, we're still not over it. Right? There was a memorial open to these children at City Hall. It's on the campus of City Hall even now. If I ask you all, did Wayne Williams do it? Most of you all would say probably not. Some would say yes, for sure. Nobody knows. But he was charged with 2 grown men, Nathaniel Cater, who you see here on the third row, third from the last, and another grown man. And the rest of the cases were closed. And so it became a real point of just inflection for the city and almost just divided the city racially, because we thought seriously this was being done by white folks. There were so many theories going on that even to the day it is still a point of contention for a lot of people. 1979. All right, next. John Lewis in 86. This was one of these tough races. And it basically had 2 best friends running against each other in a race that got very ugly, divided friends, family loyalties. But at the end of the day, 2 great guys who had grown up in the civil rights movement together runs for the 5th Congressional District. Again, that race splintered Atlanta. The town went with the Morehouse man and Julian Bond. We call the Morehouse Mafia was over there with him. And the street folks were over there with John Lewis, and the streets won. There have been a couple political races where that was defining. The Marvin Arrington Bill Campbell was another race where we were saying we about to get us a black mayor, right? Real one, and Marvin Arrington. But Marvin, if you've seen the documentary on Bowlegs, you'll see a great documentary. You should go check that out. I appear in that documentary talking about the race, but this was one for the ages. And I had a little bit of part to do with that. I was over there with the Morehouse crowd for about 2 or 3 days. I drove Julian Bond around to campaign events. I was, just out of college. In fact, I wasn't even out of college in '86 or so. But I was just kind of entering college. I was driving him around like Miss Daisy. And all I remember, he was never on time, always late, and told me, just run the light. He said, as long as you're with a lawmaker, don't worry about being with a lawbreaker. That's what I tell these young people now that drive me around. Just run the light, because you're going to be the one getting tickets. I said, well, Mr. Bond, I can't do that. But one of those great races, go back, read the history. I won't go through a lot of it. Next. It's Atlanta. When Atlanta wins the Olympic Games, another big event. And the reason it's such a big event because the Centennial Games supposed to go back to the place that it started in Athens, Greece. But the man who will never get the credit, won't accept the credit, because we could give it to him, and you don't have to do a cursory look at history, was Andy Young. The IOC, the International Olympic Committee, is made up of nation states and members of it. Instead of going to Greece, back to Athens, Greece, where the Centennial Olympics was, a 100-year celebration, Andy Young went and lobbied those African nations where he had been UN ambassador and told them, vote for Atlanta, right? He was a major part of that. And so when the IOC made the announcement, people were shocked because they knew it was just going back to Athens. But we did go to Athens, but some of us in Athens, Georgia, because Andy and others had worked that process thoroughly. And what Atlanta learned to do is what Los Angeles before it did not learn to do, and that was monetize everything in the Olympics. So instead of leaving here with a bill, Atlanta had all kind of stadium. Colleges had dormitory. The AU Center had stadiums and everything else built, and it didn't cost us one dime. It was one of the most economically successful times in the city, led to some of the retransformation of housing, led to people would say regentrified Summer Hill, but some of it needed to have some improvement. But the Olympics was a major effort on the city's part. It leads to Shirley Franklin, who had a part to do with the Olympics, but her election signals a time of transition in Atlanta, that a woman who had worked for both Andy Young and for Maynard Jackson, that a woman could win here, right? And that a woman could be mayor. She could occupy the top seat because she had ran city government really under Andy. People said Andy was the mayor that made Atlanta an international city, right? Maynard was the mayor that made Atlanta a business quality business place, a place to do business for black people. And Shirley emerges as his chief of staff, and she runs the city, which leads to Keisha Lance Bottoms and others. You cannot, I'm just going to tell you, brothers, you can't win in Atlanta without black women. You can forget it. I don't care if you're running and you cannot ingratiate yourself with black women, you will not win a citywide seat in this town, right? People ask me why I don't run. I say because there might be a black woman on the ballot, and you might well just pick up your ball and bat and go home, okay? Because it ain't going to happen. I think that's it. Is that the last one I had? Okay. All right, so that's really just a snapshot. All I want to do is take y'all on the tapestry of what leadership and what has merged. Some of these people behind the scenes, some you may not have even heard of. How many knew everybody on that board? Nobody. And that's the importance of kind of unearthing our history. And not just for Atlanta, but for anywhere. We have to understand how we got here. And I had to compress a lot in that time. What time is it now? in his hour or so that I've been speaking. But that's it, really. And now, if you got questions and answers, I'll be glad to take those. Anybody a question, you can stand and these lights are red in my eyes, so I can't see as well as I may be able to hear you. Yes, right here. Yes, ma'am.
So you did highlight some of the women who were community activists. Was there anything that was,
Yeah, if you can stand loud and project. Can y'all hear her? Okay. Oh, y'all got a microphone. Okay, good.
so you highlighted some of the women who were community activists. Did you have a sense that anything was accomplished from their efforts?
Oh,
Just in terms of them having access to City Hall is one thing, but did any of the things they cared dearly about to improve those communities, did any of those things happen?
absolutely. And one of the things we talk about is public housing with Louise Watley. Louise Watley, the Atlanta Housing Authority, had never had a policy of on-site relocation. I'll talk about housing another time, and if you listen to my radio show, I talk about it all the time because I think Atlanta is continue to be a leader in the housing, in the affordable housing area. And you have to give Renee Glover her props for that because I simply, what we began to what we internalized was we needed public housing, we needed buildings. But my grandmama lived in there. It was a cinder, in Carver Homes. It was a cinder block, no central heat, no central air. That's where she lived, right? Now the villages of Carver is not Carver Homes. They have swimming pool, they have 2 clubhouses, and guess what? People pay 30% of their income. So if your income is $300-400, like my grandmother was, who worked as one of these maids, and all she's living off is Social Security because they didn't put a 401 saving plans in place for her. So you have people who live in Carver Homes who, and it's the way they set it up, who don't pay anything. You have people who pay market rate. Then you have people who have a tax credit housing. So it's less than the market. So that's the only way that you really can do housing. So Louise Watley made it very clear by that time, I am now who she and my grandmother were running partners. I went to City Hall to work on some of the things I need in my community. I was very clear about that. And Louise Watley was on that agenda. And so always in the back of my mind is how do I help my grandmama and them, right? That's my enlightened self-interest. So it's the only place, Louise Watley, who still lived in Carver Homes from the 70s on up until the 90s, 1997 when I'm elected, said, I'm going to live in the new Carver Homes since everybody voting for it, right? It started with Eva Davis. Eva very clear. They moved Eva and them out. Eva and them came back. Louise Watley told me straight up, I ain't moving. She said, no, sir, I'm not moving. I'm going to stay right here. And I told Renee Glover, look, she's not moving. So y'all going to have to build around her, clear out a section, and about 20 older black women. They all stayed. It was the only place they did on-site relocation, and she was the first one could pick any apartment that she wanted. That's how powerful she was, and how I understood that it was my responsibility to protect her in that community. And so that's what we did. And so, no, they didn't go to City Hall. City Hall had to come to them, right? Andy Young would tell you, when he got ready to run for Congress, he was going meeting with all of the community folks, and he went to Susie Laborde, another one of the great leaders in our community. She said, well, I was the mayor. I'm going to Congress. We're getting ready to run for mayor. He ran for mayor after being in Congress. And she said, well, okay, well, who are you? He said, I work, because Andy's from Louisiana. And he told her, I work with Dr. King. She said, well, look, we made Dr. King. So what you want from us? What you going to do for us? She said, what are you going to do for us? Because otherwise we're not inclined to support you. So yeah, they were a power base. Now I can tell you what comes with the rebuilding of public housing is a decentralization of that kind of leadership. So that's the downsides of it. Right? But yeah, they were a very powerful force to be reckoned with. I saw a hand back here.
Oh. Hey,
Yes.
Derek. Hey, Derek, how you doing?
Good.
You understand?
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say, well, first of all, you look great. Haven't seen you in a while.
Thank you.
And before my question, I wanted to appreciate a lot of the slides that you showed because they brought back some great memories of my childhood. I had a great childhood, but the only bad thing in my childhood that I can recall is, of course, the missing and murdered children.
Yeah.
I was around the same age as you. Jose Williams, my dad was an attorney. He was the first black attorney to practice in DeKalb County. And Jose, my dad was his lawyer for a time. And I used to see him come
Wow.
in my dad's office all the time because he had clients in East Lake Meadows, Kirkwood. His office was on Glenwood, right before Candler Road, right there. It's right on the edge of Atlanta and DeKalb County.
Right.
So I would see him all the time, but I didn't know who he was. But my question is actually about the Atlanta race riots. Did you ever hear any stories about, because you were around a lot of the old heads, so to speak.
Right.
Did they ever talk about that period? Did you ever hear anything about that? Because it's almost like it didn't happen. They don't talk about it really much here.
Well, and we call it Atlanta Race Massacre. Maurice Hobson, who I think was here this week, did a seminal work on that. So, and he won an Emmy Award for his kind of retelling of the story. But yeah, I mean, it is one of those stories that they won't bury because it all started with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. A fabricated lie from the Atlanta newspaper set a chain in motion that allowed white men to just come downtown and start on Decatur Street, just trying to kill black men and black people, right? And so, when the Hunter tells the story, the deal will never get any glory. And so part of why I'm so glad to hear Brother Simmons talk about this series continuing, and we need to do others, because they will not, look, we got them banning books and firing teachers for teaching you this. If they thought they could shut me up, they'd probably come in here and try to shut this lecture down. But at the end of the day, it is our responsibility to tell that story. And we also have to tell the story of when they got to South Atlanta. When by the time they get to South Atlanta, they have a postmaster general called Luther Judson Price, who Luther Judson Price Middle School now is named out of. But when he got, and if you know the history of Atlanta, South Atlanta originally called University Avenue because that's where Clark College was, Clark University. So Leet Hall, one of the oldest building, most historic buildings, that's the original campus of Clark. All of those streets, Davidge, Meldon, Middleton, all of those are named for deans and professors in South Atlanta from Clark University. But them people had their guns ready, right? When the white folks started coming over the hill, they started shooting. And they tried to figure out now, how do these Negroes get guns? And what they found, what they were accusing Luther Judson Price, who was what? The postmaster general over in the area, of shipping the guns and everything from coffins to, through the mail, and telling them, y'all better, black people, you better be armed, because I'm hearing the conversation. Because even now we go to the post office, have all kind of conversation. But yeah, we have always, I don't want us to ever believe that black people just willingly went on with tyranny. We resisted it. And get Dr. Akinyele Umoja's book, We Will Shoot Back. Because there's never been an epoch in our history where we just going to tolerate injustice. So yeah, that history is clear, but because many of the promoters of that history are institutions, that's why racism is both vertical and horizontal. It goes up and down and across. But they hid that because blood was all over their hands.
What year?
1906. All right. All right. Yes.
Hello, my name's Ricky Miller. I really appreciate the panel you're having here. I really appreciate the history of Atlanta and all we've done over the years. But something that I often feel I don't hear much about or understand much about is kind of the more general context that sometimes the youth play in these certain time periods throughout history, especially like the 80s or so to now to like early thousands maybe.
Right.
Because as I am a youth trying to help transform and work with different groups in Atlanta, it's kind of hard to continuously plug into all the other histories that those who either persons who are moving here or upholding parts that I don't think I fully grasp a lot of times because just as like a observer perspective, often when I hear narratives of these, you're getting lots of pieces of or lots of different figures outlined, and then sometimes you're given a location, and then like how like acts transformed another thing. But I think it's harder for me as a youth. I mean, this may not be all youth to fully grasp and understand how that story is really playing out, what it fully means. And so I want to impart that because sometimes I think that's what can be challenging, imparting things to youth, or maybe just me. It could just be me. Because when things are put as like person, event, and sometimes location, it's harder for me to grasp it when I'm walking the streets and I don't fully think it is like kind of mapped out as a full visual story. So I just kind of wanted to ask about more youth aspects, if you knew any, and just also tell you that part if it helps.
Yeah. So if you go back through, and that's a wonderful point, but let me say, if you go back through the slide presentation, click back through, you'll see a Julian Bond, and I started off with Arthur Langford. How old did I say I was when I met him? 17. How old are you? 27. I met this man when I was 17. Julian Bond gets elected at 20, and Arthur gets elected at 23 years old to the Atlanta City Council. I get elected to the City Council when I'm 29, had just turned 30, because I had a pattern to look at. But Arthur then asked me, could I help him? I asked him, can I carry your bag? So part of what we have to do, even with the younger generation, when I walk off of this stage, I'm going to walk right out here. And I hope that you will get with me. Let me introduce sitting behind me. In fact, this young man is, tell him how old you are and tell him your name.
I'm 28, and my name is Arthur Langford.
What's your name again?
Arthur Langford.
Okay. All right. He's 28. I knew him before he was born, still in his mama's stomach. Michael Langford is his father, who I said was what? The best friend I had in this world. And he's Arthur Langford, the nephew of the guy who's on this billboard, who have streets named for him, who have an expressway named for him, buildings named for him. And so there's no doubt that the connection here, because we have no success without successors. And so I say to young people, John Lewis writes to Dr. King when he's 16 and said, what do I need to do to join your movement? Dr. King sends him a bus ticket to come to Auburn Avenue, 330 Auburn Avenue, where the SCLC office is. John Lewis arrives when he's 16 off the farm in Troy, Alabama. Dr. King sees him and he said, that is who? Are you the boy from Troy? And so that moniker stuck with John Lewis until he died. Oh, that's the boy from Troy, Alabama. And so part of what we have to do with our young people, because they have put these distractions up in order to keep you separated, right? But don't let me walk out of this door with all this information that I have and not connect with you. Because the reality of it is they're banning books. They're keeping you from lectures like this. They're telling you, they are programming you by what you see on these screens. They are making you understand you are now in a world where race is inconsequential. But that's why I'm so glad what happened the other day happened, because now you'll see that race ain't inconsequential. You will understand the importance of being race conscious, right? Because all of these great gains that these people up here, and all of them, Arthur was 23, I was 17, John Lewis, 16. Julian Bond, even younger. He was a part of SNCC when he was a student. You can flash through these. Any of these. Jesse Jackson over there was a student following Dr. King from North Carolina A&T. Hosea Williams, a student from Morris Brown College. Morehouse. This young brother runs at 29 against a United States senator, right? Grace Town Hamilton comes into politics in the 60s, right? When she's a young person. Caroline Blank, the first a Clark Atlanta University graduate, and she runs as probably about a 20-something-year-old. So the reality of it is that most people that you see out here, I didn't wait till I got to be 40 or 30 or even in my 20s. I was fully engaged. I was in jail. I had been arrested already by the time I was 20. I've been arrested about 13 times now protesting. And so I think part of it is incumbent upon us because I could give you and I could sit for days and I would not exhaust the wisdom that I could provide for you. And here's the thing that many of us are yearning to do is always sit down. This brother drives me, he works for me, and I made a promise to his dad that I would look after him when his father died. And so you will not see him too far from me because I believe that is my obligation that I owe to his uncle, who I met at 17, and his father, who I met around the same time. But get with us, man. That's when I told you I would go over to Hosea Williams' office. I wasn't no grown man. I was still 22, 23 years old. Because I looked at the tapes and I saw him sitting there with Dr. King. If you're sitting there with the most profound leader this world has produced, at least one of them, I want to sit next to you. Right? So don't let me walk out of this door and not get with me. Yes.
Thank you, DB. Thank you to the Auburn Avenue Research Library Committee. This has been amazing. Thinking about that 1906 question, I think we also remember the Dixie Hill riots.
Yes.
Then I think the following year, Summer Hill, right back to back. And so we've always been able to resist. I want to thank you, DB, for how you tied in the leaders, because I don't think I've ever heard anything like this. I think every college program in America needs to have this, particularly in Georgia, in the Georgia University system, because how you tied in the women. I know you have a lot of mentees that are men, but the fact that you invoked the ancestors that gave up the women, because I knew a lot about Eva Davis, but the way you brought in Maddie Jackson and Louise Watley, I've never seen all that done in one setting. So I thank the sister for the question, because I had a similar question. Okay. But I just want to quickly ask you, when you talked about the Atlanta Way, of course, you mentioned Daddy King. We knew about William Home Borders and, of course, Attorney Walden. Were there any names that maybe we don't know, like maybe Dr. Mays or Dobbs, or
Certainly.
anybody that you didn't get a chance to mention on this?
John Wesley Dobbs obviously become the mayor of just profound, and he did it. He was a Prince Hall Mason, and so am I, and so is Doug. Those of us who are Prince Hall Masons, you cannot be a Mason if you're not a registered voter. He understood, and this was Maynard Jackson's grandfather, right? And so he understood the power of the vote. We understood if you give us the ballot, we would, and I ain't gonna start because we'll be here another 2 days. If you give us a ballot, we could elect people that would hopefully go to City Hall and these places of power and not forget us. But I have to give the lecture lest we forget. Some of these Negroes done got intoxicated with power and go there and not only forget you, but then try to punish you with policy. And so it's not just enough now to just elect them. You got to sit down with them. You got to coach them. You got to let them know that we're not sending you up here to be an individual. And then you got to punish them when they step outside of what they're supposed to do for the people. So that means sometimes I ain't going to support you. Sometimes I may have to find a candidate to run against you, right? And so that's how we have to do it. But you know, the other side that I didn't talk about was the emerging class of business leaders. Because of that movement, it produced people like Jesse Hill. Jesse Hill, Atlanta Life, President of Atlanta Life, that used to be right across the street before Georgia State bought everything up down here. I'm sure they probably won't buy the library if it went up for sale. I ain't mad at Georgia State. But Jesse Hill emerges as another one of those who go back and talk to Mills Lane and others. You see Jim Davis. These corporations then have to begin to open up to be more diverse because of a Maynard Jackson. You will not be able to quantify what that man's emergence means. So a place like Georgia Power that had been lily white now have a CEO, Chris Womack, and happen to be a friend and a frat brother. That don't happen unless we start early enough. It took us a whole 50 years to get there, but the chairman and CEO of one of the biggest corporations in America is now a brother. And Jim Davis at Georgia Power emerged as a community man who you can make one call and he can turn your lights back on even though you didn't have money to pay the bill. Delta Airlines, what's my guy from Delta? I see his face just as clear as day. Oh my gosh, I forget his name, but again, he emerges as the community liaison, for Delta Airlines. And not only do they do that, you see Carl Ware at Coca-Cola, highest placed black man in Coca-Cola. He was a former president of City Council, and they told him, look, we have a job for you, right? They were trying to clear out, thought Maynard or somebody else was going to run for that. He said, we'll offer you, a job at Coca-Cola, but you got to give up City Hall. They were trying to get their person in as number two. He gave up his job at City Hall, and then you see the emergence of Marvin Arrington and others coming in there after that. But he became the highest ranking black at Coca-Cola. He takes Ingrid Sanders Jones, who was his secretary at City Hall. And after he leaves, she becomes the highest ranking black at Coca-Cola. And they began to open the door to other possibilities. Now we have folks like Curly Dossman at Georgia Pacific, and a lot of these philanthropic arms of those corporations are run by folks that look like us. Thank you for the question. Anything else? Yes. And I don't know how we're doing on time, Vic. I don't know how much time we had, but okay.
So my question is, you mentioned the big five, the five ministers. Who were they again?
Help me out, Doug. You have A.T. Walden, who's really not, they are not all ministers. You had William Home Border. You had Daddy King. Who am I missing? And I'm having a senior moment. But these are the major ones, right? But Daddy King, William Home Borders are really the ones. A.D. Walden are the ones who really are the major ones. And Daddy King, because they knew, look, by then, they knew who Dr. King was, right? They knew who he was. And, they knew that we have to control him. But they also knew Daddy King. Daddy King wouldn't know, he wouldn't know nothing to play with. Daddy King is preceded at Ebenezer by his wife's daddy, A.D. Williams. So A.D. Williams is the father of his wife, who's actually assassinated while she's playing the piano at Ebenezer, 1974, I believe. And so her father passes the Ebenezer on to Daddy King. And so, you have this kind of confluence. And so they really, the real question was, how do we not become this city where we turn hoses on black people and dogs on black people? And you will not go and find that in the history of Atlanta. I dare you to go find it and bring it back. It didn't happen. You won't find Dr. King leading a major protest here. Why? Because Daddy King said, don't do it. And Ralph Abernathy calls Dr. King to Dexter Avenue Baptist Church in Montgomery. He's called there by Ralph Abernathy and placed in Montgomery. All right? but you don't see that. But Julian Bond, Sister Chancellor, you see women and students in the Atlanta University Center saying, the hell with that, we're going to go down here to Woolworth and sit at the coffee table and order food. They defied that. That was always this created tension between SNCC and SCLC. I mean, SNCC and, SCLC. And Dr. King, right? He became a little bit more radical in the latter years. And I can talk about Dr. King forever because a lot of people walked off from him when the government declared him the most dangerous. Riverside Baptist Church, a year before, the same April 4th, 1967, they declared him as the most dangerous man in America before he's assassinated a year later. J. Edgar Hoover did, after he said, gave the speech Beyond Vietnam. I saw a hand here, yes.
Yeah, I do have a question, because also, as successful as some of these movements are, I know that people are in their own neighborhood or they're in their own tribe. And so my question would be, it looks as though we are working together, or they were working together, but could there have been a class issue even between some of these movements that we don't really talk about because we're really concerned about race and overcoming the racism that took place? But was there, at some point, there had to have been a class issue between some of the movements? Like perhaps you didn't want to have Maddie Jackson leading that conversation, even though she had to take that upon herself.
Oh, certainly.
So how then, or did they overcome that particular issue?
I think class becomes a distinction when we get to the 70s and we see poor people. I mean, Atlanta has always had the black middle class, right? I was asking Sister, and she'll tell you, when she told me where she lived, where she had moved to, I said, which one of your parents were a teacher? And which one worked for the federal government? So when we started moving in, see, we always had Collier Heights. I mean, H.J. Russell, is a magnet and then didn't just start being one. He had an indoor swimming pool in the 50s. So Atlanta was a place where black people learned how to make money and make a living. That's when you could order a $5,000 house out of the Sears Roebuck book, right? And a new car for $2,000. And so we always had this kind of, middle class here, upper to upper middle class or middle class individual. And you always had poor people. I think when you see the decline of public housing, because housing has a limit. My house built in 1958, I renovated it about 4 times, right? But if I didn't renovate it, it probably fell apart. That's what happened to public housing. And people said, we're not willing to live like this. You had the 80s bring on the whole crack epidemic. And these communities are out of control. So much so that just like with the crime bill, black people won't say, look, bring the red dog in because we want these Negroes in jail. Well, those of us who are civil libertarians say, yeah, we want them in jail too, but Jesus, did you have to kick down the door and beat up everybody in the house? So I think you see class emerging, particularly in the late 70s and 80s. Class kind of played in the children murders. Because them black women were saying that these was white children, y'all, whole city hall would be, and that really was a point of contention for Maynard Jackson. Because them women wanted him out. They wanted him gone and anything that reminded them that their children were just being taken off the street. So that was this tension there. But as I said, even with Carver Holmes when they had the shooting, they had to send, and this is the Atlanta way again now, is you got to figure out who do you send to these people to make sure that their needs are met, even to the poor people. So you see organizations like Economic Opportunity Atlanta emerge. If they need food, give them shelter, give them subsidy, give them the water bill pay, give them whatever we can put our hands on. And so I think it has always been. But now you see also that same conversation being had now, that there is nowhere for poor people to live, and I can walk right out of this building, turn left or right, and you're going to see people sleeping on the ground in a city that's supposed to be as progressive as Atlanta. So class is always present. It's how it manifests itself. And at some point, you can't continue to hide these Band-Aids. You've got to get some real programs to deal with the poverty that exists in a city like Atlanta and the crime that comes along with it. Anything else before we walk out the door? Look, let me say you all have been fantastic. I've enjoyed every minute I spent with you. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me. You can listen to me every day. I'm on the radio also. How many of y'all listen to Too Much Truth with Derek Bolden? Raise your hand. From 4 to 7 p.m. on WAOK. And thank you. If you got some questions, I'll hang around in the lobby to chat with you. And thank you so much for coming out. Thank you, Brother Simmons.